For hundreds of years, Israel's high priest had followed a very strict ritual on the day that was known as Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. By Christ's time, there were some changes. The high priest, before the slaughter of the sacrifice, was kept up all night, not allowed to sleep. He was interrogated by the elders of the synagogue. He was stripped several times lest he defile himself. And then in the morning, when a rooster crowed, they lit the first fires for the sacrifice. I want to read to you what the New Testament says is the meaning of Yom Kippur, which Christ fulfilled as the Christian high priest. I'm going to read to you from Hebrews chapter 6. Here are the last verses. The book of Hebrews interprets the meaning of Yom Kippur. And here in Hebrews chapter 6, verse 19 on, we have this hope as an anchor for our hearts. It's safe and sure and goes through the curtain of the heavenly temple into the inner sanctuary. Jesus has gone there before us on our behalf. He's become a high priest forever in the priestly order of Melchizedek. Now I must remind you that a priest had to be taken from among men. So Jesus became a man, but he becomes the true Melchizedek. And Melchizedek means king of righteousness. We read about the first Melchizedek in Genesis chapter 14, where it says he rules over a city called Salem, which means peace. The same chapter 14 doesn't give us a father or a mother, doesn't record a life or a death. So Melchizedek typifies a high priest who will also be a king, who has neither beginning of days nor end of life. So Christ is the true Melchizedek and the true Aaron. And at the cross, he entered within the veil. By his resurrection, he had access to the heart of the universe, to the Holy of Holies, the presence of God and the angels. We read more about it in the 9th and the 10th chapters. And in these chapters it tells us that the Jewish sanctuary, which had 2 apartments, was typical. That the first apartment represented the era of the Old Testament. The rule there was distance. No one could get near the Shekinah glory in the Holy of Holies. Distance was the law. Stay away. The ordinary priest and the high priest ministered only in the first apartment. But on the Day of Atonement, on that day only, with incense and with blood, the high priest went through the veil, dividing the 2 apartments into the second apartment, which was typical of the Christian dispensation. Let me read to you a little from Hebrews chapter 9. First of all, having described the first apartment, it says in verse 8, the Holy Spirit clearly teaches from all these arrangements that the way into the most holy place has not yet been opened as long as the outside tent still stands. And then in the 12th verse, when Christ went through the tent and entered once and for all into the most holy place, he didn't take the blood of goats and calves, he took his own blood and obtained eternal salvation for us. Now note what it says in the 25th verse. The Jewish high priest goes into the holy place every year with the blood of an animal, but Christ did not go in to offer himself many times. Then he would have had to suffer many times ever since the creation of the world. Instead, he's now appeared once and for all, when all ages of time are nearing the end, to remove sin through the sacrifice of himself. So the book of Hebrews interprets what the high priest did. And as we read the four Gospels, we are to see that the ritual of the high priest is alluded to over and over. Christ is kept up all night after Gethsemane. He's stripped several times of his clothes. He's stripped to be scourged. He's stripped by Herod's men to give him another cloak. He's stripped at the cross, naked. And like the high priest, he was interrogated. He was interrogated by Anna and by Caiaphas and by Pilate. And the Gospels also have mention of the crowing of the cock. It even mentions there's a fire where Peter warms himself. So Matthew, Mark, Luke and John allude to Yom Kippur to tell us that Christ has now become our high priest. We're not alone. There's someone who cares for us. There's someone who represents us. There's someone who knows everything about us, faults and failings, sins and all, and who loves us still.